Hello, this is Rabbi Dr. Juan Marcos Rojona Gutierrez, and we're continuing our discussion on Jewish perspectives on life after death. And we encounter, which I think is agreed upon by everybody to be the most striking passage in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible, regarding the idea of Mechayeh HaMetim, the resurrection of the dead. And we find this, of course, in Sefer Daniel, the book of Daniel. Now, in academia, there is a general consensus that dates the book of Daniel, or at least part of it, to rather late, and even to the point of dating it to the Hasmonean era. Now, of course, you don't have to believe that. If that's not your perspective, that's perfectly fine. Now, the book of Daniel, in many ways, is interesting because it's a composite work, at least the way we have it today, because the first chapter is in Hebrew, and then, if I remember correctly, chapter 8 through 12 are in Hebrew, and then 2 to 7 are in Aramaic. And whatever the case, if we look at chapter 12, verses 2 to 3, we find what I would describe as the most unobstructed view of resurrection from the biblical era. Now, the reason that I brought up this issue of Daniel being composed rather late is that if that is the case, then it shows how much of a transition there was between passages which seem to be rather obscure or where we can infer the idea of resurrection. Or if we look at it from a different perspective, if we date it to the exilic period in its totality, we still have somewhat of a quote unquote rather late development. Now, I'm not suggesting theologically that these ideas are absent from the text, but I'm looking at this, of course, from a historical perspective, from an academic perspective. So I'm trying to sort of bridge two different issues. One is the theological, and one is the historical. And of course, they don't necessarily have to be in sync with each other. I know that might be perplexing to many people, but it's important to sometimes differentiate one particular issue from another. Whatever the case, if we look at verses 2 to 3, we'll find, of course, the most striking passage, as I said. And if I look a little bit closer, I apologize. It's because the text is very small, even on my screen. I haven't mastered how to make it larger, so if it looks odd, I apologize. And it says, "Va'et hachiv ya'amod Michael hasar hagadol ha'omed al bnei amecha v'chaita et tzara asher lo nichta נחייתה מחיות גוי עד העת אחיו ואת אחיו ימלט עמך כל הניצה כתוב בספר." So there's several things here. First, it says, at the time shall Michael stand up, and this is the first, as far as I remember, there may be a reference also, I think, in one other book, if I remember correctly, but Michael is referenced, this angel, and we're sort of supposed to know who this is, which I think is sort of interesting, which seems to be a development of the latter part of the Second Temple period. Whatever the case, he's the great prince who stands for the children of Israel, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to the same time. And at the same time, thy people shall be delivered, everyone shall be found written in the book. Now, this is interesting, right? The Katuv Basefer. What is this book? We're not really told what it is, but immediately, if you're familiar, of course, with Rosh Hashanah, you think about the book of life. The dates are recorded for judgment, Yom Hadin. Of course, these are sort of later conceptions, but they're really drawn from earlier material. So I think that's sort of striking to look at. And then it says, "Rabim mishneh atmat afar akitsu ele lechaye olam ve'ele lecharafot lidron olam," and many that sleep in the dust, mishneh atmat afar. Just like we find in the Amidah, of course, centuries later, depending on how we're dating this, could be significantly later. He is faithful to those who are asleep in the dust. We've talked about that before. They shall awake some to everlasting life, and it says elech lechaye olam, and some to reproaches and everlasting abhorrence, lidron olam. So this is obviously very striking. It's clear that something will happen and people will be restored. Now, we'll see in some of the commentary or some of the additional comments that I have that it's not, I wouldn't say fully developed, but there's some things I think that we have to think about. Now, the last part says, "V'chamash kilim, excuse me, yad chiru kochar harikia umatzdike Harabim hakochavim leolam va'ed, and they that are wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, the rakia, and they that turn the many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. So here's that sense of eternality, something in the future. Let's continue. Ooh, went too far. So there's a couple of things here that we can look at. The text does not necessarily explain why only certain individuals are resurrected, because I think that's one reading that you could derive, that some will come to life and some, to everlasting, some type of punishment of some sort. And in what state these individuals exist. So that's the first question. We assume, obviously, that it's referring to a bodily resurrection as we sort of understand it today. But that's something that maybe requires additional review. Now, if the resurrected righteous and the knowledgeable are identical, then the reference to them being radiant like the bright expanse of the sky might be tied to a new body brought about by the resurrection. So that's just something that I was talking about sort of in a larger context, another discussion. We can look back at that in a second. And then Daniel's portrait of eternal punishment and eternal reward reflect the perspectives of other likely contemporary works in late Second Temple period. And of course, we're going to look at those. So we haven't really touched on that for the most part, but we have this idea beginning to emerge, at least at this stage, of something beyond and then some state. Now, to be honest, we've looked at that in the sense that certain passages about Sheol indicated, or at least they inferred, that there were different places within Sheol, and some were reserved for those who were truly wicked. And so I think that's something that is key to remember. And I'm just looking here. You can tell this is live. My comment regarding the knowledgeable is extracted from a different section, so I apologize for that confusion. But I think here, obviously, we find something that's critical to our understanding of the resurrection as being one key aspect of Jewish perspectives on life after death. And again, in future videos, we will continue to expound that.